2030.
Saudi Arabia, the Point of Investment Fund,
It's a
there's
big
a lot of excitement
This
around
transformational
NEOM specifically.
change. Every aspect of the kingdom, economic, social, cultural, religious.
The 2030.
This is the 2030.
Yalla.
Episode 17 of the 2030 Podcast. Dr. Hanaa Amoyabid, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Welcome back from your very busy travels to Asia. How was it? I trust everything was well and you were safe and comfortable.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a really really packed trip, but it was really good. Safe, comfortable. I mean, I feel like Singapore might be one of the safest places to visit in the entire world. And it's comfortable. It's humid, but as an Eastern province girl, humidity is something I grew up with, so it doesn't faze me that much.
You have a little bit of a humidity tolerance built in, yes.
Slight tolerance.
So how was it? You were there presenting a paper as well, and then you went to Indonesia as part of your trip for work. Tell us more about it.
So I'll try and be brief. It was, like I said, really varied. So initially I was at the Middle East Institute, which is part of the National University of Singapore, and I presented a paper on vocational education in Saudi Arabia on a panel where we were kind of looking at how skills are being taught within training institutions and how that fits into kind of the broader ecosystem of the education system within Gulf states, which was, kind of my area of research throughout my PhD and beyond. So that was really good and great feedback. Actually, the conference was opened by the former president of Singapore, Madame Halima Yaqub, and she gave like a really nice speech. And then the closing ceremony, we had the Singaporean Minister of Education there. And he is my role model. Like, I had stars in my eyes while I was listening to him speak. Singapore really knows what they're talking about when they think about education. And it's just so inspiring to listen to him firsthand and actually hear him articulating so many of the things that I believe in. So it was great.
Amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, he is really cool. And they definitely walk the talk in Singapore, I think my favorite thing that he said was that it's really, so they do really well in international standardized tests like PISA and TIMSS and so on. And what he said was, it's great and those are really important, but we cannot get hung up on focusing on our scores on the international tests as a measurement of how well we're doing within our education systems. And what we need to do is make sure that we never lose the zest for learning that our students have. And I mean, that's really hard to achieve, but he really hit the nail on the head there. So very cool.
Zest for learning is something that we also have on this podcast, but you're right. Singapore is an amazing place. And then you went to Indonesia as well as part of this, right? For Rawabi?
Yeah.
Holding?
So as some of you may know, I am a non-executive independent board member on the Rawabi Holding board, and I sit on a couple of committees. But anyway, we have a joint venture with a company in Singapore who have shipyards in Indonesia. So we took a 1-hour ferry ride from Singapore to Batam, which is an island that actually primarily does a lot of kind of marine services, and there's many shipyards. So I was there and I got to watch the launch of one of our vessels, Rawabi 212, I believe. So, it was built on that shipyard and it was great. There's Bighorn. They cut a cord and for the first time the ship slides into the water. Very, very exciting.
That is really cool. That they don't do the
cool.
champagne bottle breaking thing anymore, right? That's not it kind of do, right?
I think it depends on where you are in the world, but they didn't in Indonesia. There was more of like a Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and then and then they let the ship go. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, nice to have you back
China.
here. Yeah.
Thank you.
Nice to have you back here. But we do all appreciate you checking in and doing an episode with us last week, despite your busy schedule, which it was great. We have a very good one this week for this episode for 17. It's all in the family is the theme. Abdulaziz Alnaim, managing director at Mayar Capital. It's Mayar, right? Or Mayar?
Mayar.
Mayar, thank you very much. So he is a board member of a number of organizations across Saudi Arabia, very bright financial mind, Mayar is a hedge fund based out of London, and he is the handsome husband of my co-host, Dr. Hanaa. So it's a really great pleasure to speak with him, and he knows everything about financial markets, not just in Saudi Arabia, but around the world. So our conversation has a view on Saudi Arabia, but with his expert sort of global lens. It's really terrific, and we can't wait to share this. And so thank you, Hanaa, as well, for inviting him with your heavy influence over him, which is great.
No, I did not have to twist his arm. He's a huge advocate of what we're building on the 2030s. So it was great, just to find time in his busy schedule. But he's definitely on board with our initiative.
Nice. And so if you're just joining us for the first time here on episode 17, welcome. We are getting new listeners and subscribers every week, every episode really. And so it's nice to see that either wherever you're getting your podcasts or on YouTube, which is also growing very quickly. Last week we had an interview and conversation with Salman Al-Sudairi discussing legal reforms in Saudi Arabia and also the new laws on IPOs and listings in KSA. Don't miss these episodes and conversations in the future. If you're here for the first time and you want to stick around, you can subscribe to us anywhere, but we suggest you get on our mailing list as well, our emailing list, so our content just comes right to you in all its forms. We have interviews, conversations with change makers from Saudi Arabia every week. We also do deep dives on important topics that are sometimes missed or glanced over. Our news segment has a conversation of news items that we think are very important and we think that are important to understanding in a broad sense Saudi Arabia. As you heard earlier, my partner and co-host is the one and only Dr. Hanaa Al-Moyabid. She's based in London, sits on the board of Rawabi Holding out of the Eastern Province where she is from, but she's also half American. So there is no accent in the English and her Arabic is flawless. She's an academic affiliated with LSE, Chatham House, now the Atlantic Council, and so many more. Can't even list them. And we're just basically here to explore the transformations ongoing in Saudi Arabia because it is a fascinating subject for both of us. My name is Lucian Ziegler. I'm a venture capitalist, strategic advisor. I've been podcasting on Saudi Arabia for the last 4 years, and I've lived and worked there for over 15 years, over 14 years now. Actually, 15 now. As of July. So there we go, July 1st. Anyway, thank you so much. That's what we're doing here with this podcast. So we plan to make it fun and entertaining, but we have a very broad mandate here to sort of understand what we're doing. And this episode is going to be a great example of the kind of value that we can bring with people like Aziz Alnaim, who is just great in his subject. So without further ado, I think if it's cool with you, Hanaa, I think we should get right into our conversation with Abdulaziz.
Let's do it.
This is the 2030.
It's my pleasure to introduce our guest today, Abdulaziz Alnaim, who is the founder and managing director at Mayar Capital. He's the portfolio manager for Mayar Responsible Global Equity Strategy and Mayar Responsible Saudi Equity Strategy, which we hope to talk a bit about today. Abdulaziz has over 20 years of investment experience and board level experience in multiple industries, including asset management, investment banking, insurance, food and beverage, amusement parks, chemicals, logistics, and education. And he is a CFA charter holder, also my husband. Welcome, Aziz. Great to have you on the show today.
Glad to be here. Excited to be on this show.
Thanks for coming on the 2030. Aziz, can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and about Mayar and what you do?
Sure. So I started investing personally 23 years ago. I've been doing this professionally for almost 21 years. But it started out essentially as a hobby and over time became what I do. The way I got into investing is essentially through the ideas and philosophy of people like Warren Buffett and Peter Lynch and Benjamin Graham. And it's called value investing. And the idea of value investing is basically that it's a conservative way to approach investing in general. I happen to practice it in public markets, but there's no reason why you can't do it anywhere else. But essentially, you want to assess what something is worth over the long term. And then you want to buy it only when it's at a discount. And then what the discount does is protect you if you're wrong or if something unexpected happens. And the difference between what you pay and what you think it's worth is called the margin of safety. And essentially, the best way to think about it is to use a concept from kind of civil engineering. And in civil engineering, when you design a structure, a bridge or a building or whatever it is that you're designing, there are essentially rules, and in many countries it's a regulated rule by the profession, where the idea is if you think the bridge is gonna need to handle 20,000 tons on average of load, and it's made out of a certain material, then the safety factor could be 2. And so you build it to withstand 40,000, and even though you only expect 20,000. And the difference between the two, to quote an old civil engineering professor of mine, is just in case. So idea is you should never know. And so value investing is that same concept applied to investing. When I started doing that, like I said, personally 23 years ago, and a couple of years after that, launched a fund that became what is today the Mayar Responsible Global Equity Fund, which is managed by Mayar Capital here in London. We manage about $500 million of assets, a team of 12. Half of us are investors and half are on the business side. And I wear a few hats around the office, but my main job is to run the business, but most importantly, to run the fund and the portfolios.
I saw on your website you have the quote from Warren Buffett: "Be fearful when others are greedy, be greedy when others are fearful," which is really great. I was sending it around to some friends today, kind of based on talking about what's going on in the U.S. right now. I want to ask you a little bit about sort of how you, before we get into all the stuff you're doing in Saudi Arabia, about how you, as a value investor, find value. Can you share some secrets from your recipe of success on how you find value investments?
Well, I think that quote is one of the main ways you can find value. And the market is not stupid. It is one of the, especially public markets, where we hunt. It is an extremely competitive place and you're competing with dozens and thousands of very intelligent, hardworking people all around the world that are trying to invest. And so most of the time, the price that you see for a stock, for example, just talking about stocks because that's what we do, is the fair representation of what is the most likely outcome of that business. And so 9 times out of 10, you're not going to be able to get an advantage by buying a good business or a bad business or whatever it is you're trying to invest in, because it's fairly valued. And when there's a mispricing, there's usually a reason. And the reason can be rational or irrational. And essentially, value investors want to invest when the reason for a discount is irrational. So a rational reason means that something is cheap for a reason. And an irrational reason is, one way to think about it, to quote Buffett, is people are afraid of something and they're too afraid of that thing, and maybe it should trade at a discount, but the discount is overdone. Or people are afraid about the economy or COVID, whatever it is that they're afraid of, and they sell things for cheaper than they should sell them for. And then if you are a value investor, basically you want to be more rational than the person sitting across from you. Often this happens by just having a longer investment horizon. So you're looking beyond the period of uncertainty, and you're willing to be a long-term investor. You have the patience, discipline, mindset, temperance to invest when things look ugly, knowing that things are going to recover eventually. And that's where you find value. Most of the time, it does not feel good to buy something as a value investor. It's usually painful, but that's why you get these advantage opportunities.
So after 20 years of applying the strategy of investing globally, what is it that you saw in the Saudi market that made you want to launch a Saudi fund?
That's an interesting question. I think literally for the past 20 years, every couple of years, someone would approach me and say, why are you investing globally? You're Saudi. And then for many of these years, I was actually based in Saudi. And why don't you invest in the Saudi equity market? And for most of that time, the answer for me was very simple. There aren't enough interesting businesses to build a strategy around. And I didn't think that our strategy, where We're value investors. We look for quality. We look for companies with a competitive advantage, companies that have bright futures, great management, good governance. This did not exist for most of that time. And then the past 5 years, I started to notice a shift, a really fundamental shift, and took a couple of years for me to really make sure it is actually happening. And once I was convinced that it is happening, we pursued this opportunity. And one way to look at it is we looked at numbers about 2 or 3 years ago. We looked at every company that's been public in the Saudi market over the past 20 years. And then we looked at companies that went public over the past 6 years. I think we looked at 2017 onwards. And there are basically two cohorts. So the recent IPOs and the very old IPOs. And we looked at metrics that we usually look at to judge the quality of a business, quality of management, and so forth. And what we discovered is if you look at returns on equity, returns on capital, stability of margins, growth rates, the variability of growth rate, the variability of margins, the recent cohort over the same period is just substantially higher quality than the old companies that were public. And so you went from, the market shifted from being dominated by a handful of banks and commodity producing companies to more of what you see globally, where you're seeing a consumer sector, a health sector, an IT sector, and it's evolving more and more in that direction where you've got much more interesting businesses that people like us would want to buy. And that kind of basically will open the door and got us kind of digging more. And then the other thing that we discovered is, well, not discovered, I knew, but the other thing that has happened since then is there's just been a fundamental shift in things like governance, and whether at the listed company level, at the market level, at the economy level. There's just a lot that's happening. All the reforms that are happening in Saudi as part of Vision 2030 that will fundamentally change the picture for people like us who want to think 10, 20 years down the road and say, is this the right time? And the answer was yes, once all the pieces kind of came together. Now, it's not where we like things to be, but the 6 years, 7 years in, the trajectory and is very clear. And so we can see where things are happening. And then the other thing is we decided that we want to be part of moving in that direction. And we can talk about this a bit later. But essentially, we also discovered that we can help nudge some companies in their journey.
So, and that makes a lot of sense, right? Because you kind of want to be at the beginning. You see where it's going. Your horizon is longer, so you want to be in the beginning when you have the confidence of all the pieces coming together. When global investors sort of look at Saudi Arabia and the financial media specifically, Bloomberg and these other outlets that report on Saudi Arabia, what do you think that they're missing? Like, is there anything that is overlooked that you see?
I think a lot, to be honest, is overlooked. And I think this is where shows like your show can really make a difference and move the needle. I'll give you one example. And it's something that I took the team here, our investment team, to Saudi about a year ago. And we went on a tour, we visited some companies and wanted them to see some of the things that were happening on the ground. We had just launched the strategy, the Saudi strategy. And one of the things that I discovered when I talked to them, and I discovered talking to potential investors who want to come in and invest with us in our fund, in the Saudi fund, is no one's talking, for example, about legal reform in Saudi. No one's talking about what's happening in the courts. No one's talking about retraining of judges. No one is talking about the split of the commercial courts and business courts from the regular courts that handle other disputes. No one is talking about how a lot of these business laws and regulations are now in writing and it's not subject to a judge's whims. All of these changes that really make a difference. They're not as exciting as what's happening in tourism and what's happening in entertainment. And so maybe that's why they don't get covered. But for investors, long-term investors, this is the stuff that really matters. The actual changes that impact your property rights, that impact your legal rights as a business, that impact the certainty that you will get getting into commercial contracts. All these things, they're the fundamental building blocks of future growth for any business, especially for an international investor who's coming from the UK or coming from the US, where they take these things for granted. And they're always worried about going into emerging markets where these things are always kind of either not present or their question marks are. And so I don't think the media is talking about things like that. You can think of it as kind of the plumbing for the Vision 2030 in a sense. It's the stuff that's under, but it's stuff that really matters. It doesn't matter if you build a shiny tower, but the plumbing is not there. But the plumbing is there, but no one is talking about it.
It's an interesting way of thinking about it. Yeah, but it is the infrastructure, isn't it? And it is what really will make it easier for skeptical investors to have confidence. So, you said you might talk a little bit about kind of how you might be working to nudge different companies in different directions. Maybe this is part of that, but you announced a couple of months ago that you were the inaugural buy-side member of the Middle East Investor Relations Association. So tell us a little bit about that collaboration and what it is that you're trying to do with that.
Sure. So one of the things I mentioned is that in the past, kind of the investor relations profession in Saudi basically was non-existent. The regulator, the CMA and the stock exchange, Dawul, have rules for publicly traded companies on what they need to disclose and the governance around it and so forth. But companies historically understood the rules and applied them essentially as a necessary evil, that they had to disclose their numbers and say we had an AGM, blah, blah, blah. And they just, and you can see even the level of disclosure, the type of things that get disclosed, the way they talk about it, it's completely superficial. And they viewed it basically just as a regulatory requirement. They did not see the other side of it. And the other side of it is, just before I came on this show, I was meeting with a UK company here at the office. They're not here because they have to come here and meet with us as one of their investors as a regulatory requirement. They're here because they see the opportunity, and we see the opportunity in meeting them in helping the company grow over time. And so there needs to be a change in culture in management teams of Saudi listed companies, where they see engaging with their investors as a positive, basically, activity that adds value, that helps them achieve their goals of growing the business and essentially generating shareholder value over time, instead of just simply a regulatory box that they need to tick. And some companies are already good at that. The majority are not, to be honest, which is where we kind of started talking to MIRA, the Middle Eastern Investor Relations Association. It was basically, its membership base historically has been a handful of big publicly traded companies in Saudi and the GCC especially. And we talked to them and we said, how can we help? We want this profession to be taken more seriously. We want to advance this. We come from 20 something years for me and the rest of the team. I hate adding years of experience. I'm not going to do that. But everyone has more than 12 years of experience in global markets here in our team. And we're like, we can come and tell you what good looks like. And we can help nudge things in the right direction. We want to work with you. And so eventually we said, okay, we're going to be the inaugural buy-side member. They didn't have buy-side members. We said we're going to be the inaugural buy-side member with MIRA. And we agreed to put together a buy and sell side steering committee to help advance that, basically. So having people from the sell side, from the analyst community, from the investment banks also come and join this. And then push through events, through education, through engaging with companies to help them improve their disclosure, improve their reporting. Some of them want to do the right thing, they just don't know how to do it. All of these things, what are the things that matter? Everything from what is it that you need to put on your website? What goes into a quarterly presentation? Should you have a quarterly call with investors? If you want to have one, how do you announce it? Who gets to come? What do you do after the call? Do you need to put it online so people can see it? Do you have a transcript and you make sure Bloomberg and FactSet and Reuters and all these get us all these little moving pieces where there's essentially, I guess, the fact that we're engaging with a company and the company is engaging back, you already have a company that wants to do the right thing, right? So often it's sometimes they don't want to do the right thing. That's a completely different problem that Mira is not going to solve or engage. But for the companies that do want to do the right thing, it's essentially a lot of hand-holding, shared experiences within Saudi, within the region, and kind of global best practices around what investor relations should look like.
Yeah, and that's just with Mira, right? You're also on the board member. You're a board member on a number of organizations. It would take the rest of this episode to just list them out. But I mean, GIB, Jeddah Fund of Funds, both of those are PIF owned or partially owned, I guess, half owned with GIB. You mentioned earlier when we were talking that you saw the development in the ecosystem, and then you also saw an opportunity to help develop it. Tell us a little bit more about that and expand on that, if you would.
Sure. Just for the record, I'm no longer on the Jeddah board. My term expired.
Oh, okay.
Just for the record, don't want someone to come in and say, but so I've been engaged in Saudi through companies, through clients, by living there, by working with other companies for many, many years. And so it's not like I was shocked, just kind of woke up one day and discovered that these changes have happened. And it genuinely, I've had people approach me 20 years ago and 15 years ago saying, let's launch a fund together to invest in Saudi. So I was not convinced that you could trade in and out, I think, with these older companies. But I don't think that there were things that I would really kind of, to my taste, want to buy and hold for a very, very, very long time. There are things in Mayar that we've owned for 20 years. And so it is through the engagement. So my experience, let's say, you mentioned Mayar Capital, where I've been on the board for the past 8 years. I chair the nomination and relation committee there. I see what's happening. I see the talent in the industry. I see where things were, where they are, and I see young people coming into the industry and in Saudi in general, and the level of skill, the excitement, the energy. It is really, really fundamentally different. I can easily kind of juxtapose that with what you see in the UK, where unfortunately young people are not optimistic. They're extremely depressed about the future. They don't come in with that positive energy, wanting to change things and advance things. So you can very easily see the difference. And by the way, you can see, I think there's a recent competitiveness index that I think IMD puts together. And if you look 6 or 7 years ago, I think the UK was ranked 18 and Saudi was ranked 27. And now Saudi is 16 and the UK is 28. So they've pretty much flipped. And I think a lot of that, people underestimate, I think, how much this soft stuff, I guess, matters. The optimism, the energy that young people have, that's what moves the future. In the end, I mean, what's the saying? Humanity advances one funeral at a time, or something like that. People don't create change. That's just, and maybe I'm on the second half of that journey towards old people. But it's young people that create change, that advance economies, that advance societies. And if they don't have a optimistic view about the future, if they don't see positive momentum, they're just not going to be invested in creating that change. And that's a huge, huge difference. And I think, by the way, that's one of the things that also doesn't get reported in the financial press globally. And it's also one of the things that you really need to be on the ground to see. Like, if you spend any amount of time with a group of young Saudi professionals, you'll come out of that saying, wow, like, I see why this was going to work.
I think that's really interesting, because I think that, actually we get attacked in Saudi a lot for having no talent, right? A very small talent pool, not enough expertise, and, as they like to call it, which, I have issues with this term, but the human capital challenge is something that we're really experiencing and struggling with. So how do you see, aside from just the optimism, talent within your sector specifically, and what's happening in that space to get people more equipped to be professionals within the finance space for both men and women?
Well, I think to answer the last question, the last bit of the question first, women in Saudi, the advancements that have happened the past several years is just absolutely incredible. And in my sector, there is a higher representation of women in finance in Saudi than in the UK. That alone is a huge, huge shift. Now, in my cohort of people in the industry in Saudi, I pretty much know everyone because there are just a handful of us who started in this industry 20, 25 years ago. And so there aren't many people who have 30, 40 years of experience in Saudi in the financial sector. There are some, but the pyramid is very narrow. But you just look at the past 10, 15 years, or especially the past 10 years, the past 5 years, the amount of people who have gotten into the industry, the level of skill. One of the things I always make sure I keep time for is I meet a lot of Saudi students who study in the UK, who are interested in the asset management industry or investment industry. And I meet a few of them every year. They usually come visit the office, talk to some of the team members. We'll have a coffee. We'll discuss what they want, what they're doing. And I'm always just immensely impressed by the talent that I see. So yes, there is a shortage of talent today, but the pipeline is there and you can completely see where it's going. And again, the energy, positivity, optimism is getting people into that top of the funnel, people who want to learn, who want to grow, want to advance, which is something that unfortunately other countries are failing at.
Can you tell us more about your Saudi fund? We kind of got a good background on like the momentum and the wave that kind of brought you in. But what does your Saudi fund do, and what are you focused on?
So it's essentially very similar to what we do on the global fund. So our global fund, which is called the Mayar Responsible Global Equity Fund, is a responsible or ESG strategy. If you want to use I hate the word ESG, but I've used responsible for 20 years. But essentially, we want to invest in companies that have three characteristics. The first one is we call them great businesses. And our definition of great businesses are companies that can earn high returns on capital and redeploy that capital over many, many, many years. Those are usually companies that have a competitive advantage. That's the only way. Otherwise, the high returns get competed away. So they usually have, to use Warren Buffett's word, a moat around their business that protects them from competition. And then the second pillar is what we call a great company. And essentially, a great company is a great management team that's acting in the interest of shareholders. So they not only do they need to be talented, but sometimes they're talented, but they're only acting selfishly in their own interest. So we want people who do not destroy the value that comes from the great business, have a track record of redeploying capital intelligently, and a balance sheet that's not over leveraged, because we think that when balance sheets are over leveraged, companies are often less resilient. They can't invest in the future. They end up making short-term decisions when we want them to think long-term. And so that's the second pillar of what we call a great company. And the third one is great values. In the end, we're value investors. And the first two pillars we'll look for all the time. And like I said earlier, the market is usually efficient and stock isn't cheap. So often we follow companies for a while until an opportunity happens where we can buy at great value. And so we look for the same three things that we've done globally for the past 20 years. We look for them in Saudi. Perhaps the one big difference in Saudi is on the mid part, the great company bit. Some of it is stuff that we have to nudge, and where companies may not be where we want them to be. So we have to engage with them more. We have to spend more time with management. We have to do stuff like Mira to get them there. But at least on a relative basis, we want to be invested in companies that have best practices and interested in getting better at things like governance, for example. But I mean, is it where we want things to be in Saudi? No, but it's heading in the right direction.
So I'm going to let you use the term ESG the same way that I'm forced to use the term human capital, just because you kind of have to, and you're talking to people so they can contextualize what you're talking about. But moving on, you just kind of touched on it, but how are you playing a bigger role? And do you see yourself as Mayar now coming into the Saudi market as an entity that will play a bigger role than just a passive investor?
Yes. I mean, in the global fund, we're rarely active. We were just meeting with a company where we're active and we're trying to nudge management to do certain things in a certain direction. Not the conversation for today's podcast, but in Saudi, a lot of the conversations we're having are, you guys really should have a quarterly analyst call. It really needs to be online. You really need to put a link on your website. I know it's basic, like you think this is, but sometimes they don't know, or sometimes there's just no one in charge of this. Sometimes there's an email that is on the Tadawul website for the investor relations person, and we email that email and nothing happens. Like one email after another, no response. And it's funny, I won't say which company it is, but there's one company and I know the CEO socially. Not very well, not like a friend, but I know him socially. And one of our analysts who covers this company apparently has been trying to reach out to them. He emailed the investor relations email from the Tadawul website like half a dozen times. He called the number on the website, on the number on the Tadawul, nothing, just complete dead silence. No answer. And he came to me and he said, do you by any chance know anyone at so-and-so company? And I said, oh, of course, I know the CEO. And he said, well, this is what's been happening. Can you do something about it? And I said, yeah, of course. And I get my phone out and I sent a WhatsApp message to the guy. And I said, by the way, we've been trying to reach out using this phone and this email, and we're not hearing back. Is there another email or phone number that we should contact and maybe you'll hear back? And he just replied, leave it with me. And then 10 minutes later, our analyst gets an email back from the same email asking for a time to set up a call to answer all the questions. So there is still stuff like that that's happening. And I don't think, I am 100% convinced there's nothing kind of unclean about it. It's just no one cared at that company to answer that email. It's turned out to be a shared inbox that no one checked. So there's some work to be done. So it's not like activism in the kind of Carl Icahn and Bill Ackman size, where kind of kicking the door and trying to make huge changes. But it's small steps. I think on the governance side, especially where we're trying to do a lot of work with some of the companies that we own.
Yeah, a little hand holding. So yeah. I kind of want to go back to the Saudi market and actually to the quote we said at the beginning, be fearful when others are greedy, be greedy when others are fearful. So Saudi Arabia is kind of having a, I don't want to say moment because it's way longer than that. Time frame's way longer than that. But there's, and I don't want to use the word bonanza either, but there's an enormous amount of excitement about the Saudi market right now. And you've also said in our conversation that it's kind of not yet where it needs to be, but it is definitely headed in that direction. We're on that path. What needs to happen next? And are there things that you're looking out for in the market right now that give you a little bit of caution or pause or hesitation at all?
So the market has always been, like any emerging markets, volatile. And the Saudi market is still dominated by retail investors. Both of these things kind of don't help in terms of and it's probably why also companies are kind of ignoring or have been ignoring IR in the past. It's kind of like a vicious cycle of international investors don't want to come in, so IR don't want to pay them any attention and so forth. But like I said, I think that's changing. I think the pace and quality of IPOs that we've seen the past couple of years and in the pipeline, even talking to companies like Tadawul, there was a HSBC conference last week here in London, and we met with management there, and they were talking about the pace of IPOs, what they're seeing in the next 12 months, 24 months. They can see kind of essentially a couple of years plus about that pipeline, and you see better companies coming public. So that in of itself, kind of the center of gravity is moving that way. Valuations can be, I think valuations in parts of the market are a bit excessive today, in my opinion, as a value investor. But valuation is a temporary thing. If you're in it for the next 6 months, then maybe you shouldn't be investing now. But if you're in it for the next several years, then definitely pay attention. And that's kind of the way we see it. I mean, there are times to be aggressive and times to be conservative as an investor, and areas to be conservative and areas to be, and I think it's not one monolith. It's now like 300 companies or thereabout. And some of them are amazing businesses that are going to continue to have delivered and continue to deliver. And I think, so you just need to do your homework, I guess.
So I want to ask a question we've asked on this podcast before, and we've talked about, kind of off and on about financial literacy in general. So, I mean, we've obviously that can influence. You were just mentioning that a lot of the investors in the Saudi market are retail investors. So, how can we improve people's financial literacy? Where do you see the key kind of gaps at the moment, and what is needed to really elevate people's understanding of the finance sector, but also just in general, how to manage money?
I mean, that could be a whole podcast, not just a whole episode. I think I can only talk about the aspects that I think I know a little bit about, which is kind of how they behave in the market, in the stock market. And I think one reason, just talking to Saudi investors over the years, that people invest directly instead of going through funds or through institutional managers, is that there is a lack of trust in the institution of asset management in Saudi, or there has been, at least historically. Now, a big part of that has to do with some of the abuses that happened in the 2005-2006 stock market bubble. And I think a lot of people got burned. And I think there have been bad behavior by bad actors at the time. Now, the CMA was new at the time. I think it was just trying to find its way. I think Tadawul was new at the time. It was trying to find its way. I think a lot has happened from a regulatory point of view. I think the industry has matured and grown up a lot since then. I don't think it's the same way, but I think perceptions take time to change. And one of the things I've noticed is if you look at kind of trust in the institution, whether the institution being the stock market or the asset management industry, basically, if you look at an age cohort, and you look at people above a certain age, people who were around investing 20 years ago when the Saudi stock bubble happened, they are burned, and you're probably not going to be able to be redeemed. But young people come, young investors come, young savers come, and they eventually, all these professionals that we're talking about, they have excess savings, they're investing it. And you see them more invest through funds, through institutional managers. So it's changing, but change takes time. I mean, a lot of these things, especially when it's an issue of social perception, it's not going to happen overnight. These things take time, but the momentum is positive and heading in the right direction. So it's just a matter of letting it run and continue to do. People like CMA and Tadawul continuing to do what they're doing. I don't think you need to do anything extraordinary for it to happen. I just more of the same, I think, will get us there.
And okay, so just to kind of wrap up, we see you on TV sometimes, and you utilize multiple media outlets to kind of really help contextualize what's happening in the Arab world and in Saudi in light of global events and what's kind of just unfolding. And it seems like a very tumultuous region. So are there enough voices that are helping us understand the developments within the region, within Saudi Arabia, and how they impact the kind of financial sector? And if not, or if there are, like, where should we be looking, or where should we kind of be guiding our listeners and viewers to understand more about these developments?
The short answer is no, there isn't enough. Which is why when you told me about this podcast, I was super excited. And I said, I think there are people, it's changing. And depending on your goals, who you're talking to, whether it's your audience or just in general. I mean, we just talked about the stock market. So if you're talking very narrowly about international equity investors, then I think the level of interest, just talking to institutional investors here in the UK, for example, level of interest in Saudi, what's happening is there. They're starting to see it's a bit late. Sorry, it's a bit delayed, not late. So their knowledge is probably 2 years old, but because so much has changed over the past 8 years, 2 years old is still a big shift for them. I think more of what you guys are doing is extremely important. I think tourism, in my opinion, is going to make a huge difference to the perception of Saudi globally. So not just in terms of creating jobs and bringing money in. I actually think this purely from a national perception basis. I think it's going to be I think we'll be surprised by the positive developments that come from tourism. Every now and then I'm up to someone at a conference in the UK who's not investing in Saudi or doesn't have any business ties to Saudi, but happen to have gone on holiday or whatever it is. And they come back and they're always surprised. They're always pleasantly surprised that we didn't know this. So I think tourism is another thing that I think will help. But again, it's one of those things where you're starting with quite a bit of baggage, I think, of a combination of misinformation, bias. So it's not going to change over time, but it's definitely changing. Obviously, my experiences are anecdotal, and I'm looking at a small number of data points. But it's more and more so. I meet people at conferences and business events, and they come to me and they ask me about Saudi, what's happening, and they want to learn more. And that did not happen.
Are there any final notes that you want to share with us? Anything that you feel like we didn't get to?
I think we pretty much covered everything. I think you get me started about talking about investing, I'm not going to shut up. So at some point you have to cut me off and end it, or I'll keep talking.
And now we have you ideally coming back talking financial literacy. So we have a whole separate episode, which would be nice to explore later. But yeah.
We can establish a whole new channel for you.
Yeah.
Great having you.
Thank
on
you,
the show,
Aziz. This is really great. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. We appreciate it. And well done with this podcast, and I'm very excited about where you guys are taking it.
Thank you very much, and thanks for all your support that you've given us. We really appreciate that too, of course.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to Abdulaziz Alnaim for coming on the show and sharing some of those insights. Really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Aziz. That was awesome. Let's get to the news.
Let's get to the news. All right. So Saudi Aramco buys 10% stake in Renault Geely thermal engines venture. In a joint venture between French carmaker Renault and Chinese automaker Geely, the companies value the business at $7.9 billion US. Geely and Renault will own 45% each of the powertrain venture called Horse Powertrain, which will supply gasoline engines, hybrid systems, and gearboxes for thermal vehicles.
Very interesting. The CEO, Luca De Meo, I believe I'm saying that right, described the deal in a statement as creating a dream team that would reinvent the future of combustion engine and hybrid technologies. As you know, Dr. Hanaa, hybrid technologies are now sort of being seen as a nice compromise for the choice between all electric and combustion engines, with some preferring the sort of capabilities of both because there are advantages to both. Toyota recently said, hey, look, like we're going to go where the market is. We're really going to focus on the hybrid technology side of things. I have friends that have hybrids that say they almost never use combustion because they're going for short commutes and they use only the electric for that part. So kind of an interesting move from Aramco, right? And this isn't one of their subsidiaries that does these investments. It's not a technology arm. It's Saudi Aramco. So it's not Wyatt, it's not Prosperity 7. This is Aramco going in on this. This is kind of an interesting move, and it shows how diversification continues to be a focus for Aramco as it goes forward.
Yeah, super interesting and pretty exciting, actually.
Yeah. Plus, you have the European Commission saying that it would impose extra duties on imported Chinese electric cars from July. There's some political stuff going on here as well. I drove a Geely when I was living in Saudi Arabia this year. I just rented a car for 4 months, and it was fine, but it wasn't electric.
Was it all right?
It was okay. It was okay. It doesn't look as good on Sahar when you get the camera, the photo of me driving it, and I'm working the blower, So no, I mean it was fine. It's
what would you rather be driving
I would like to be on one of those kickstart, one stroke. Yeah, no, it's just that you're gonna have that photo.
Breaking the law.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, I didn't dispute it, but yes, I would. No, so I had one photo where I'm actually listening on the phone. It was a very important call that I had to take, so it's okay. I'm sorry to everybody, and anyway, maybe I'll share that picture with you after this. Saudi Arabia is set to host the first eSports World Cup, kicking off on July 3rd at Riyadh Boulevard City for 8 weeks. More than 1,500 players representing 500 elite international clubs will compete in 22 matches. Saudi Gazette reports it will be the most expensive tournament in the history of the sector, with a total value exceeding $60 million US dollars.
Saudi's announced it'll issue e-visas for holders of tickets to the event, an announcement made by the eSports World Cup convention in cooperation with the Saudi Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Culture. Visitors to the eSports World Cup can also experience other things, including sports, entertainment, educational, cultural activities, and creative activities in the World Cup tournament.
This is really cool. I mean, like eSports, like it's funny because it's a huge business now. It's a huge industry. And according to Circuit, MBS is a Call of Duty fan, His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, and has earmarked $38 billion from the PIF to attract 250 gaming companies to set up shop in the country and create 39,000 video game related jobs. So this has always been a focus for His Royal Highness the Crown Prince, not just as a fan of esports, but as an economic decision, probably because he sees things like Japan and in the United States, how many jobs these can create, how much money they can create, and also their ability to unite people online through gaming across the world, which is why it's interesting that July 3rd, Riyadh Boulevard City is where this thing is being held. So pretty cool. And you know what? It's going to be inside. So the heat will not be a factor, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, do you play Call of Duty or any of these games?
I did when I was coming right out of college. I played a few games similar to that and then just like made an executive decision that I just couldn't do it and had no time. I like them, but it's been 10 to 15 years now since I've done anything like that. It sucks.
Call of Duty is Modern Warfare, right? It's the same. That's what it's called, or is that a different game altogether?
Yeah, Call of Duty is modern. That's like a franchise,
Modern
you would
Warfare.
say, or like an issuance.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's first person shooter games.
Yeah.
So.
Those aren't my favorite games. However, I did let my son play it because I didn't really want him to be left out. But like he quickly turned away from it as well. He's more of a strategy game player. So like obviously there's strategy in all of these, but like one of his favorite games is called, what's it called? I can't even remember now. Suddenly I forgot. He talks about it all the time, but it's like you're trying to take over the world. It's a geopolitical game that's based in kind of like World War I, and it's looking at what alliances you can form.
Like diplomacy, is that what it is?
It's not. I don't know why I can't think of it.
Because
no,
that was the
it's not
same
called
way.
that.
It was like Warcraft and StarCraft I played. I also did like Sim City and stuff like that where you're like building and like doing
SimCity
strategy
was one
and
of my
stuff.
favorites.
Oh, it was the best. Yeah, back in the day. You and I were both like desktop PC gamers, right? Like that's in high school. Not like gamer, but you would play like, you obviously did Oregon Trail. Did you ever do that?
I did Oregon Trail a little bit, but I wasn't in school in the US. So, I missed that. But I know, I know about it. But then also like in, what is it? Tomorrow, one of my favorite books that I read last summer, there was like Oregon Trail featured quite heavily in it. Like that. And there's a lot of gaming in that book, which is pretty cool. So anyway.
Ooh, reading about gaming. That sounds interesting.
Well, it's fiction, but like the kind of protagonists, they're both gamers, so it's pretty cool, like a woman and a guy, and it's their relationship, but it's also then like it's a company that they built together to build video games, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, my brother still plays StarCraft on a PC, and then he will watch like two Korean dudes play StarCraft against each other. The Korea has like a national tournament or whatever, and he like watches it, and I'm like, what are you I'm here.
That's really
we can hang out. Yeah, exactly. So
I remember the name of the game that my son plays. It's called Hearts of Iron. It's really complicated. And then obviously both of my kids love to play Minecraft, which has expanded. Like, so when Abdullah was younger, it was mostly just building. And now it's, all sorts of different games and competitions and whatever, like Bed Wars and whatever. Anyway, but my kids, because they were like kind of, basically they got online really early because of COVID. They often don't even care about going and hanging out with their friends as long as they're all playing the same game and have a Zoom call going at the same time. It's like they're in the same room, they're talking to each other, they're playing the video games. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely the future, right? They hang out with their friends physically, but a lot of the time they'd just rather be in the comfort of their own home where I can feed them and they can play and nobody has to worry about like rooms full of big stinky boys.
Yeah, I mean, and that's if you think about like why this matters for Saudi Arabia strategically, I feel like that is kind of captures what they want to do, right? They want people to be playing these games. They want to host events like this, but they also, are realistic that Saudis spend a lot of time inside. And so like these games, like it's very interesting, but you also have at the same time an initiative, actually a third technically of the vision is, high quality of life and thriving culture and vibrant society. And so you have efforts to get kids outside playing sports themselves. But anyway, it's a good story and pretty cool. So good luck to everybody gaming in Riyadh this week, which is awesome.
All the best. So Jeddah season 2024 kicks off this week under the slogan, once again, Jeddah season activities commenced at Jeddah Art Promenade on June 28th with drone displays, fireworks, visual presentations, and street performances. Inaugurated under the patronage of the Deputy Governor of Mecca region, Prince Saud bin Mishal, the season seeks to attract visitors and create jobs as well as attract investments to Jeddah. It includes motor skill games, Arabic plays, restaurants and cafes, as well as the Warner Brothers Discovery Celebrate Every Story area, which is held in Saudi Arabia for the first time.
The Saudi Seasons Initiative launched in 2019, and these are the same seasons that you have heard of when it comes to things like Riyadh season, which is probably the biggest of them all, and also one that's starting to get some international play and some international attention because of these major fights and these big soccer matches that they're having, football, and all of the events happening at Winter Wonderland and Winter Garden in Riyadh, which is really an impressive thing to visit, truly. And this is all from the Ministry of Tourism, pretty much. The 11 seasons include Riyadh season, Jeddah season, Sharqiya season, the Eastern Province, the EP, Taif season, Suda season, National Day season, which is also here in the United States right now, Diriyah season, Al-Ula season, Hail season, and as well as Ramadan season. And who could forget, last but not least, Eid season.
Yeah, and the festivals deliver back-to-back activities, sports, culture, music, and more in each of the host cities. So it's, again, exciting that Jeddah season is back because it really means that visitors come and experience these cities again, sometimes for the first time, sometimes again. And it's a draw into the destinations for people because it's like, I remember the first time I went to Riyadh during Riyadh season and my Uber driver was like, you should go see the season. And I'm like, where is it? And he was like,
aren't we in it?
I know.
Where do I look?
And he was like, just go online and anything that says season, just go there. And I'm like, I don't know what he's talking about. And I wasn't really sure what to expect from Riyadh season. Like I didn't know what the deal was. So basically, there's pop-up restaurants in different parts of the city. There are some places where there's concerts, there's new entertainment venues, there's all sorts of different things, and they're happening everywhere. But basically what it means is there's just a little bit of extra activity going on in arts and entertainment and that kind of thing. So with Jeddah season, again, it opened on the promenade, but that it's not only going to be activities there. There's going to be things throughout the city. And you can experience all sorts of different things just by being in Jeddah during the season.
This one's going to make my KFUPM boys super stoked that we will be discussing it in episode 17 of the 2030. But Saudi's KFUPM students win first place in the SUAS 2024 event. Saudis won first place at the Student Unmanned Aerial Systems 2024 competition, beating 70 other student teams from universities around the world. Held at St. Mary's County Regional Airport in St. Mary's County in Maryland. This was in Maryland, which is where I am, and
did you not see a bunch of unmanned drones?
I saw it all on LinkedIn, but I didn't know it was coming in advance. I kind of wanted to. This seems like the type of thing that I would roll to. Anyway, We're back. Hello. St. Mary's County Regional Airport in St. Mary's County in Maryland, which I believe is out west. The competition is designed to foster interest in unmanned aerial systems, tech, and careers. It is hosted by Robo Nation.
It's been held annually since 2002, and it requires students to design, integrate, report on, and demonstrate UAS capable of autonomous flight and navigation, remote sensing via onboard payload sensors, and execution of a specific set of tasks. So these students were hosted at the Saudi Embassy in Washington, D.C., and Ambassador Her Royal Highness Rima bint Bender tweeted, "Congratulations to our amazing UAS 2030 team from KFUPM, who won Best in Mission and first place overall in the SOAS competition. They represent our amazing youth-driven, innovative, and leading path forward, and I'm so proud of you." So it was a great photo of her with the team.
Amazing. So actually, this is like 12 miles from where I live in the summer, but it's 12 miles by the crow flies. There is the Chesapeake Bay between us. It would be a really long drive for me to get there, so I'm sorry. Plus, it's just very interesting. So it's down near a huge naval base, which is why it's sort of like, I'm sure that there was a lot going on there. But so they beat 70 teams, which is amazing. Good for them. That's awesome.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, very cool. Congratulations.
Sticking with the family, Saudi Embassy in London hosts a seminar on Saudi women. Arab News reported that His Royal Highness Prince Khalid bin Bandar Al Saud gave a keynote at an event at the Saudi Embassy in London organized by Johara Global as part of their summer summit. The event hosted Raham Harag, the first Saudi woman to ascend Mount Everest, Sosan al-Bahiti, the first Saudi female soprano, she's an opera singer, and Nawal Khalawi, who is a culinary artist, and Reem al-Jaffali, who is one of the first Saudi women to hold a motor racing license and named as one of the 100 of the world's most inspiring and influential women by the BBC.
So did you receive an award at this event? Was this the event you received an award at?
Yes. So it was a 3-day
it's
event.
Awesome. Yeah.
It was a 3-day event. I was not at the embassy because I was still in Singapore. However, I did receive an award at the end of the event, just not at the day that we were at the embassy, because I'm affiliated with Johara Global. I've been kind of working with them, and I'm the Education Mediation Pillar Chair and Head of Research.
Amazing. Well, congratulations. When I saw this, I was like, wait, you were here at this event. We should have just done a first-person view kind of thing. Women at this event also spoke about their challenges.
At the embassy,
Okay, but you were in Singapore. It's okay. Yeah. Anyway, congratulations. And you got a jewel, right? You got like a big jewel.
Johara means jewel. So the trophies are jewels. So the women, actually, the 4 women that spoke received jewels, and I received a very similar one the next day.
That's amazing. We should do some awards, by the way. I would love to be like handing out the 2030 awards. Yeah, it's not a bad idea. We'll put a pin in that. Women also spoke at the event about the challenges they have faced as women, overcoming them, and how their journeys have redefined female inclusion in a society reforming under Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030. Kate Partridge, chairwoman of Johara Global, also highlighted how men can play a role in women's empowerment. Quote, "Our mission is to support the evolution of women's leadership through a culturally unified platform," she said. "We also acknowledge the positive roles men play together with women for the betterment of their societies." That's couldn't be more true.
Yeah, it's a great initiative, Johara Global, really to try and bridge kind of relationships between women in the Middle East and in Europe and North America. And they've been doing some great work. It's, if you're interested in learning more, I think looking up Johara Global and what they do is a good idea. It's a member organization where you can really kind of benefit from cross-cultural collaboration.
Amazing stuff. One bonus one this episode, I should say, Dr. Hanaa. Aqua Power signed a huge $3.3 billion deal in projects in solar energy. Aqua Power Company, PIF owned, announced the signing of power purchase agreements, PPAs, valued at $3.3 billion to develop, implement, and operate 3 major solar photovoltaic PV projects. The large-scale solar plants will be located in the western and northern regions of Saudi Arabia, sorry for the EP, and are expected to go online in the first half of 2027. Soon.
Yeah, the announcement of the 3 deals comes only a few months after Aqua Power secured financing for the construction of 3 large-scale solar projects in the kingdom with a combined capacity of 4.5 gigawatts and an aggregate investment cost of $3.4 billion. These countries will be jointly owned by Aqua Power, Water and Electricity Holding Company, Bedil, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of PIF, and Saudi Aramco, which owns 34.9% equity stake in each of the 3 project companies.
Aqua Power is an enormously impressive company. They are publicly traded. They were founded by, I believe it was Mr. Alnaim. I think that's correct. Do I have that right? Anyway, if that's not correct, we're taking it out. And if it is correct, we're leaving it in. But they have equity in their company from the PIF. And they are starting to become more and more dominant in the region outside of Saudi Arabia. They have projects in the UAE and other places in the Gulf. They are expanding very, very quickly. Just an enormously impressive company. I was at their headquarters in Riyadh a few months ago and just can't say enough about what they're doing. And the role they're playing in the vision truly is kind of amazing, because as things ramp up in terms of renewables, and it's actually a theme that we've been hitting on pretty consistently over the past few weeks on our program here, they are just going to become more and more of a household name. I spoke with leader at that company somewhat recently and sort of asked them, like, hey, like, you guys are doing so well in the region. Like, do you have global expansion plans? And they essentially said, not really. There's so much going on here. We have so much opportunity when it comes to solar. Financing is a lot easier here for these projects. We have such a great track record with banks. We're at a great spot. We just want to focus here. So it's going to be a household name if it isn't already in Saudi Arabia and increasingly outside of Saudi Arabia. So, yeah.
Amazing.
Great episode, Dr. Hanaa. Congrats on your jewel, the Johara jewel, and the launch of your new ship and your successful presentation of a paper. You're making me feel like I'm not doing anything over here, but it's very impressive, and I think it's awesome, and I'm glad you're back safe. And thanks as well to Aziz for joining us for that awesome conversation. It was terrific. Thanks to you both.
Thank you.